In this video, we're going to be giving you our list of the 10 best wrestling video games of all time. So first up, we have WCW/NWO Revenge. Released in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, the sequel to the 1997 release WCW vs NWO World Tour took the wrestling simulation genre by storm, as players had never seen such a good-looking game that also played so smoothly. But for all the praise it received for its gameplay, perhaps the most appealing aspect of this title was the huge roster of talent that it boasted. You see, this is the era where WCW was a serious competitor to WWF and ended up nearly being the main wrestling brand that we would still be talking about and watching today. You had playable characters such as Hollywood Hulk Hogan, The Giant, or The Big Show as we know him today, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Macho Man Randy Savage, and so many more. Honestly, the list is huge. Having this much star power made Revenge the ultimate wrestling game for fans of the sport at the time, and even had a few game modes for you to play so things didn't get too stale. There's a reason that Revenge won 1998's Fighting Game of the Year. WWE All Stars was a refreshing take on the genre with its arcade-like gameplay and cartoon graphics. It may seem goofy at first sight, but it has an undeniable charm to it once you start to play. More current wrestling games tend to aim for the most realistic experience possible, which is extremely hard to do given the nature of the sport. So it's a good thing that THQ provided us with this more relaxed and gimmick-filled game before they sadly went out of business in 2012. The game itself offers a whole variety of wrestling legends to use, whilst also having a pretty developed story mode for players to get invested in. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but seeing as wrestling is supposed to be about dramatized action with it being in the sports entertainment genre, you can't really knock this title for being so over the top. Give it a try if you're ever looking for a new experience, it won't disappoint you. Next up is another game published by THQ, WWE Day of Reckoning 2. The graphics that this game displayed in 2005 were way beyond their years, especially when you consider that this game was released on the GameCube, which was hardly the most powerful console on the market, even back then. The gameplay is far more traditional than All Stars, with Day of Reckoning 2 displaying some impressive mechanics and good-looking animations. What really sold this game to fans, however, was the continuation of the story mode from the prequel, Day of Reckoning, along with an in-depth creator-wrestler feature which fans of this genre usually go crazy for. It also brags a huge roster of 45 different superstars to play as, and a respectable 10 different match types to compete in. Also, seeing as it was released in an era where local co-op dominated, it can support up to 4 players playing at once. So come to think of it, if it were remastered, it could well have been in contention to make our list of the best couch co-op games. Okay, now for my personal favourite of our selections, we have SmackDown vs Raw 2007. Wrestling games have always been a little bit hit and miss over the years, but this era of SmackDown vs Raw was undeniably one of the best. The series brought us 7 of the best wrestling games to ever hit the shelves, however, listing all 7 of them would be pretty boring. So we've chosen 2007 to represent the pack. Along with having the best gameplay we'd seen from a wrestling game at this time, SmackDown vs Raw 2007 also had a wide variety of game modes to enjoy, including a lengthy and entertaining story mode and an extremely in-depth general manager mode where you could take over SmackDown or Raw, sign the wrestlers you wanted to, and book shows how you thought they should be. It also introduced a stamina system for the first time, where after a few consecutive moves you'd need to take a little time out to recover. This realistic addition to the game might seem like it would slow things down and make it a little bit more boring, when actually it added an element of pacing to the fights and meant that if you and your buddy were fighting against each other, then you couldn't just spam the basic punch attack 476,000 times. Oh yeah, and you were finally able to enter the crowd and fight, so that was pretty cool. All round, this game encapsulated everything that's great about wrestling and also the video games that simulate it. Moving away from WWE for now, we have Fire Pro Wrestling World, which is one of 4 titles released by the Japanese developers Spike, and offers what most hardcore wrestling fans believe to be the most authentic experience when it comes to wrestling simulation. The previous entries to the series were all released in the early 2000s, but were beloved by players for their intricate mechanics and extremely large roster sizes. You thought 45 superstars was a lot in Day of Reckoning 2? Well, Fire Pro Wrestling World has over 100, with there admittedly being a few licensing issues here and there in terms of name rights. But one of the best things about this game, and something that has gained it a huge cult following, is the customization available. In Fire Pro Wrestling World, you can download pretty much any superstar you like and put them into any promotion you like, with the option of creating your own being there too. Then you can fight them against each other in any of the game modes available. This allows players to have a constantly updating roster as new stars come through, but this isn't the only use that the downloadable content has. In the game's version of General Manager mode, you can use these new superstars and create dream matches that you might never get to see in real life. Such as, for example, Kenny Omega going up against WWE's Golden Boy John Cena. The possibilities and combinations are endless and help to give this game a ton of replay value. WWE 13 was the second title released after the SmackDown vs Raw era and honestly is one of the better games to be released under their name. With the man that made wrestling cool again, CM Punk, on the cover, it was bound to sell well, and to be honest, I'd have bought it just for the box art alone. Building on the somewhat mediocre WWE 12, which to be fair to it was always going to struggle being the first game released after SmackDown vs Raw, WWE 13 kept the same improved graphics, cleaned up the gameplay, and made Universe a whole lot more playable. However, where this game really made a name for itself was in its Attitude Era mode, which took fans on a 60-match journey through the history of debatably the most popular era we'll ever see in WWE. Replaying iconic matches as Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mankind, and more will have the players that lived through these moments bursting with nostalgia, whilst teaching the players that didn't exactly why they were icons of the sport. Even if the in-ring experience isn't the greatest we've seen in this title, it gets a place on our list through its content alone. Going back a few years now for the next entrant, we have WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. This masterpiece was released in 2003 and paved the way for so many titles after it, with its innovative features and extremely fun gameplay. Back in the day where WWE weren't so conscious of their PG image, wrestling games allowed you to do a whole host of pretty terrible things, like throw people off buildings and roam around the city causing havoc during a hardcore match. Seriously, this game is absolutely bonkers, with there being little to no limit of where you could go and what you could use to fight each other. I really wish that current wrestling games would take note of this and incorporate it into the current titles, but these sorts of slobber knockers are unfortunately a thing of the past. Aside from being able to tour the city you were fighting in whilst in a match, Here Comes the Pain allowed you to choose from an extremely large roster of wrestlers including current at the time male superstars and divas who are now much more respectfully just called female superstars, amongst an assortment of other WWE legends. However, the only slight downside to this game is that the emphasis was clearly on the gameplay and the free roaming aspects, as outside of those matches there was a year-long story mode to complete and that was about it. There was a pretty decent Create a Wrestler feature though, making SmackDown Here Comes the Pain one of the all-round best wrestling simulations we've ever gotten our hands on. In the year 2000, AKI Corporation gave us what is largely considered to be one of the best, if not the best wrestling games of all time, WWF No Mercy. Remember when we said that the wrestling community loves a good Create a Wrestler feature? Well, WWF No Mercy is the shining example of exactly what players wanted. Clearly in today's climate this seems outdated and limited, but at the time the freedom you had was unrivaled. Fans could either create their own superstar in immense detail, or they could even create wrestlers they liked in real life that weren't available to play as. Even to this day, players are downloading mods and creating wrestlers for this game, over 20 years on. The gameplay of course was great for its time, even if it may look pretty slow when you look back on it. And along with the new Create a Wrestler options, you also had a large and diverse roster of licensed wrestlers to choose from. When you pair that with a whole bunch of different match types to try them out in, you have a recipe for an instant classic. This next selection might surprise a few of you and cause some controversy, as this game doesn't have the luxury of being looked back upon yet with rose-tinted glasses. But WWE 2K22 is the best game that 2K have released in years. Despite some of the obvious bugs the game has, including a pretty bad crashing glitch, it still delivers the best wrestling simulation we've seen in terms of how it looks and flows. 2K22 manages to make the bouts feel like real matches, with there being 1,000,001 different move varieties that you can do, utilising whatever parts of the ring that you want to help you do this. But aside from the gameplay, which you'd imagine to be the best given its recency, 2K22 also brought the life back into the franchise with the reintroduction of the extremely popular My GM mode and a brand new mode called My Faction, which is very similar to NBA 2K's My Team mode. The My Career mode of old 2K WWE titles has now been replaced with My Rise, which is actually a really fun and engaging story mode which sends you down lots of different journeys on your way to the top of the WWE. Seeing as 2K took a whole year off to make this game after 2K20 was received horribly by fans, you'd expect it to be great, and it really is. It has a massive roster, an infinite number of match types, and an expansive online Create a Wrestler community. I think we'll look back on this title in later years and see it as the spark of change that the series so desperately needed. To close out the list, we're jumping all the way back to the year 1999 with the incredibly popular title WWF WrestleMania 2000. Looking back on it now, wrestling fans really were spoiled, having this game come out just a year before WWF No Mercy. To be honest, for the review of this game, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, as it doesn't really boast anything new on the other games on our list, but instead impresses with how much bang you get for your buck at the time. It had a great selection of wrestlers to choose from, more match types than you could ever want, and best of all, a story to sink your teeth into that would make it near impossible to put the controller down. It looks and feels a lot like No Mercy as you'd imagine, but even though the N64 had its limitations, it used every last bit of its power to provide players with the best experience possible at the time. It's a true classic and one that helped define the wrestling simulation genre. If you enjoyed this video, then the chances are you'd enjoy our 2K22 MyGM challenges as well, so I've put one on screen for you to click onto now.